I directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. Where's the gold?
This is the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Fergus Hodgson, your host. Thanks for tuning in. If you've not already, please consider subscribing. If you'd like to hear more about mining, precious metals, and economic freedom, we'd love to have you stay with us. We have today David Skarica. He is an old friend of the Gold Newsletter and the New Orleans Investment Conference. From memory, I met you there about a decade ago, David. David Skarica is the founder and editor of Addicted to Profits, addictedtoprofits.net. He also has a new book out literally in the last couple of weeks, The Next Wave, How to Make Mega Profits with the Next Debt Collapse. This is in an ebook version. So, David, welcome to the show. And I'm actually more interested to hear your own life story, and I suspect this is what the listeners will be curious to know about too, how you basically were a refugee from Canada. What do you mean by that?
Well, we call it a tax refugee. So, okay, just a little background, because I'm sure a lot of the listeners are American. And so most countries around the world tax you on your residency, not your citizenship. I am, right. I'm dual. I'm Canadian and British. My dad was born in Leeds. But I really have no British blood. My family moved there after the war. And then actually when Canada was quote unquote the land of opportunity, you're a Kiwi. I don't know what your story is, but, a lot of people moved to North America after the war because with Europe bombed out and a lot of the world turning into communism, and then a lot of large countries such as India kind of going inward for a number of decades, like North America really became kind of a bastion of economic success in the 50s and 60s. So there was more opportunities for my grandparents who were, on my mom's side, Polish and the Polish Jews, and on my dad's side, Bosnian and Slavic, just sort of in Yugoslavia, and Austrian. And then they all moved to kind of like my mom's parents moved to Montreal. My dad's parents moved to near Hamilton, which at that time again was a big industrial city, similar to Detroit, etc. And he had the immigrant story. He had like the 3 jobs. And, worked in a factory, worked as a waiter, et cetera, was able to buy this beautiful property, which had a river going through it near waterfalls. It's called Webster's Falls. Anyone can just look it up, for like $10,000, back in 1960. Right. So that's another issue when we talk about this, is the cost of living in Canada. So then my dad, he then became kind of the first, and along with his family, they had more opportunities. We're able to go to universities, get better paying jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But by about the mid 90s, when I was I was born in 77, so I was 18, 19 years old. I was already starting to get worried because this is when Canada had kind of a debt crisis going on. The dollar was being devalued during the 70s with Trudeau, and even the 80s, the conservative government was not really, similar to conservatives today, was not really, a conservative government that was, fiscally responsible. So Canada had a large debt, and they got downgraded a few times by Moody's. Obviously taxes were already higher than the United States. And people have to remember, in the 60s, this stuff was all different in Canada. Canada, when the dollar was par back in the early 60s, was actually a more conservative society than the U.S., both like socially and politically, and had lower taxes, et cetera. Actually, a lot of investment companies used to locate, like John Templeton, the famous investor, did this. Before he moved to the Bahamas as well, he actually had his investment company incorporated in Toronto because there were lower taxes in Toronto than they were in the United States at the time. So anyhow, that all changed. Really, Trudeau's the one that really got that. Lester Pearson wasn't the greatest either. And then I just decided at a young age, also, maybe because of my background, a lot of Mediterranean blood, on both the Jewish side and the kind of Bosnian Croatian side, I was like, I cannot stand the winters here anymore. So some of it was a lifestyle choice, And I have a bit of a bum knee, and it's like, sometimes I give out on the ice and stuff like this. So I was just like, I'm kind of getting really tired of this, So, but anyhow, so I made the decision that I was going to, move, so much so that I was just telling some people. I had a little barbecue at my house on Saturday. And, I told my friends at the barbecue that I still remember, I don't have it anymore, but my high school yearbook, and this would have been like 1996. I actually put in there that I was going to live on an island tax free. I don't think too many 18-year-olds are writing
You were
that.
you were ahead of your time, mate.
Yeah. So then I did that. So then finally when I, my business was doing well enough, I decided in 2005 to move. And actually, first I was going to move to the States just because, a lot of Canadians, the brain drain, they call it, move to places like Florida, etc.
Sure, Texas especially, yeah.
Texas, and then just in general, more opportunity. Like people forget that obviously Elon Musk, he moved to Canada before he moved to the States. He almost used Canada as a gateway to get to the States. Walt Disney family was originally from Canada. Jack Kent Cooke, who owned the Washington Redskins, was actually from the town I'm from in Hamilton. So a lot of successful businessmen, especially when it was easy to go over the border, back in whatever, the 40s, 50s, 60s, you just go, without ID, it would use that as almost a gateway to the bigger market. But what happened is I went to Fort Lauderdale, and I know I brought a lot of people down there, but to be honest with you, I'm from a small town. I'm not a big city person. I really didn't like it. It was like, I was just like, this is kind of like Toronto South. It's like a rat race. There's traffic everywhere, because there's always these transplants everywhere. I just found that people weren't overly friendly. So then I remembered in 97, I went on a vacation to the Bahamas, and I liked it a lot. And it's British Commonwealth law, English speaking. It's like, the GDP per capita is kind of it's like a second world country. It's not a culture shock. Obviously, it's close to North America. There's a couple direct flights every day on WestJet and Air Canada. And obviously, it's a tax haven. You can move here and then become a non-resident. Gets back to the point I started out with, where only the United States taxes on citizenship. Western Europe, every other country in the world, I think other than Eritrea, which also taxes on citizenship, taxes on residency. So I just became a non-resident. I moved to Bahamas. I moved most of my, bank accounts and all that stuff down to the Bahamas. So I did it totally legally. And then I lived in Nassau, which was the city for 5 or 6 years, always rented. Lost my ass in 2008 when all the junior miners got killed with the rest of the market. I was someone who thought, I'm hedged. I got gold, and then gold tanked with everything else. So then I was like, I need something tangible. And by that time I was in my early 30s. I knew I didn't want to live in Nassau because Nassau after 2008 and the Bahamas had a very slow recovery from the financial crisis. The crime was getting worse. It was also becoming more overpopulated, et cetera, et cetera. So I came to this island called Eleuthera. Basically, I took my car on the ferry over on this boat. It's about a 2-hour, boat ride. And I drove over. There's something, anyone can look it up on the internet. It's called the Glass Window Bridge. To me, it should be one of those 7, 8 wonders of the world. It's actually where the Caribbean Ocean meets the Atlantic. So the one side of the bridge is that turquoise blue, shallow water the Bahamas is famous for. Then the other side is the deep blue of the Atlantic. And they meet right at this bridge. This bridge is like a gateway to the two oceans. So I think it's about the only place in the world where you can actually see two oceans meet in the dichotomy of the water. And when I was driving over the bridge, it was like the sunset at the same time. And right away I was like, yeah, I'm moving here. So I bought my house here. It's in 2011. And I did it mainly for lifestyle because Eleuthera is a little more off the beaten path. The infrastructure wasn't as great in terms of internet, but I kind of made it work. And that stuff's all gotten better now too. For anyone who's interested in moving to a place like this, I basically had competition come in with the government-owned, telecom company. So the internet's pretty fast, and 5G should come in here in the next year or two, and that will solve basically all my internet problems when that happens. And it's fast enough where I stream sports, TV, music all day while I'm working. So, and I live in a very weird area. You wouldn't think a finance guy's living in. So I live in Surfers Beach, which is what it sounds like. There's a beach, there's surfing, similar to maybe not the extent of waves in Australia or someplace like that, but a lot of old hippies from the 60s live here. When you see a party at my house, you'll be like, wow, that's not a finance. Like, I've grown my hair long, yeah, and I love it. And everyone kind of knows each other here. It's a small community of expats and the locals. All the towns are really just generations of families that have been on these smaller islands for maybe 100, 150 years. So there tends to not be the crime there is in Nassau. Maybe there's B&Es, little stuff like that, but there's definitely not the violent one, right? Yeah, and then like one thing that the island is famous for is, and he's done a whole bunch of promotion videos for the island, is that Lenny Kravitz has his music studio, and his house here is probably like a 5-minute drive from my house. And then he brings celebrities here all the time. And they'll just walk around town and no one even cares who they are, right? So they're coming here because they don't get harassed or bothered or whatever. I was at a party about 8 or 9 years ago, and Lenny was there, and we went to this little bar. It was actually for Passover because Lenny's half Jewish and the people running it were Jewish. And went to this little, and my mom danced with Lenny Kravitz. It's like the highlight of her life, to take, So no, and it's a cool place. It's laid back. It is what's called island time goes on, where any work that gets done in your house, anything you have to bring in, it does take forever, right? Things when you go to the grocery market, especially now, it's going to get a little even worse, are much more expensive, probably 50 to 100% more expensive in the States, but the money in Canada, but the money you save on kind of that income tax, is also, kind of makes up for it. And also because of this huge real estate bubble we've had in Canada, the cost of living here isn't as, as bad compared to Canada as when I first moved to the Bahamas 17 years ago. And the reason is because, a dump in Toronto is $1 million. A dump in Vancouver is $2 million. I bought my house for like $350, I think. It's probably, I think, roughly doubled. But still, if you saw my house, it's on a half-acre property. Talking about these two oceans, I'm on a 100-foot hill, which is like a mountain for the Bahamas, right? The Bahamas is mostly flat. And I have the view of both oceans. I can watch the sunrise, sunset. And I have about a half-acre of land. It's like, if you had a house like this in Toronto, it'd be worth millions and millions of dollars. So the cost, and the nice thing here, I was only able to get a 10-year mortgage, but that's great because I've paid it off. I'm 44 years old, and I'm debt-free.
Right.
So I think, and you're seeing that, by the way, now I'm seeing the boom because I think the lockdowns were so bad in Canada. The cost of living's gotten so bad. The taxes are so high. I don't know how much I'm wanting into some social views, but the political correctness factor, kind of not being able to say what you really want to say, especially like when it comes to comedy, I like guys like, Sam Kinison, Dangerfield, and, Dice Clay and stuff like that. So, I'm really not very politically correct when it comes to, my views on comedy and things in general. And in Canada, you do almost have to watch things that you say all the time. We have these new internet laws being passed, etc. And even if you go look at what's going on in the government wise, people, Trudeau making speeches all over the world, but he had a minority government that got less votes than Conservatives. And then he was able to tie in with the NDP. Really, no one voted for that, right? No one voted for that to be in power for 5 years. And now they can do whatever they want, like if you think of it this way, what he really should do, if he wants to represent people as a whole, he should make deal with Conservatives, right? And then that's like 70% of the vote, those two parties, and move more to the middle. That's really what he should do. But he's got some agenda he wants to impose. And anyhow, so those are all the factors. Yeah. And I hate to say this because I love Canada growing up, obviously gave the story I told about, sorry, and then I'll let you speak.
Yeah.
My grandparents and my dad, my dad had a way better life in Canada than would have, in Bosnia in the 1990s. My grandfather was from Prijedor, which was one of the worst towns in Bosnia where there was a mass grave and all that sort of thing. But like it gave us opportunity. But now I kind of view Canada the way my grandparents viewed where they were from in Europe. That it's like, you got to get out of there if you want more opportunity or be able to save your money. Like, again, not paying income tax, what that does towards your disposable income, etc. And now also paying my mortgage off, the amount of money that frees up, not paying income tax and not paying that, is huge. And the whole thing with the healthcare stuff in Canada is what your private insurance costs is so much cheaper than what you're paying in income tax and the percent of your income tax that goes to universal healthcare if you're making good money. If you're making 40, 50 grand a year and you're lower middle class, that system is great for you. If you're making well into the six figures, that system is awful for you.
Right. Mate, there's so much to say. And you believe that basically your view of the future when you left in 2005 was actually almost optimistic versus what has happened.
Yeah, because it was really just a combination of lifestyle and taxes. Like, I knew there was the bit of the political correctness stuff and, that Canada, in Canada had been moving that way since like the early 90s, but it wasn't en masse. Like one of my favorite shows, is Trailer Park Boys, which again is like the most politically incorrect show of all time, and it's shot in Nova Scotia in Canada. So it's like that's when that show was really being shot in early to mid 2000s. But it's like now it's gone so far, and then also there's this kind of hypocrisy, corruption side of it, where like one reason these real estate prices, especially in Toronto and Vancouver, are so high is that we all know there's a ton of Chinese money laundering that goes on. And that money is just trying to get out of China and will buy, properties for any price. That was kind of going on in London with the Russian money, which has now kind of been stopped because of the whole invasion in Ukraine. But in Canada, we know that, like, this has been going on. It's
not a secret. Yeah, it's obvious. Just go to Vancouver and you see the Chinese presence. It's heavy. Yeah.
Yeah. I went to I rented at a couple meetings in Toronto because my dad lives about an hour south of the city. I was like, you know what? I don't want to commute every day. Let me just rent an apartment for 1 or 2 days, right? And like again, like it's like when I went to that apartment, half the people living in there were Asian. And you could tell it was just like, Chinese parking their money, and then they have, and if any, like kind of now it's going on China when what hits the fan, they got to kind of out by coming to Canada. But again, a lot of that money is not from the cleanest sources in the world. And that's why they'll overpay, because it's just trying to get out of China. And the problem with that is it prices the everyday average working class Canadian or that kind of poor immigrant from Eastern Europe, India, China, Africa, wherever they're from, who just kind of wants to start build a life like my grandparents did. It prices them out because a dump, like I said, is $1 million.
The Gold Newsletter is proudly sponsored by Inventa Capital Corporation, a venture capital advisory firm dedicated to the acquisition and development of assets in the natural resource sector. Today, Inventa is one of the premier mining groups with a first-rate portfolio of companies and a world-class team.
This is the Inventa Mining segment, and we have Leo Hathaway, who leads Golden Shield Resources. That's goldenshield.ca, and the ticker is GSRI on the Canadian Securities Exchange. Leo, we chatted a couple of months ago, and I see you have been making progress in Guyana. Do you want to clarify for me the drill results, your initial drill results, and then what's going on with this over-the-counter ticker so Americans can more easily get involved?
Right. Well, we had an initial drill program at our Mazoa Hill property, which is the flagship property. We drilled 50 meters at 9.8 grams. We then went to an adjacent property, about a about a kilometer away on the same property. Called Toucan Creek. We got a number of hits there, including 8 meters at 1.1 grams, 6 meters at 4.8 grams. So we'll be going back to Toucan Creek. Right now, the drill is back on Mazoa Hill, following up on that 50 meters at 9.8 grams and stepping out from there, expanding the resource.
You got to be a bit more creative with your language here. You're tight-lipped there. Are these results positive initially? You're still very optimistic?
Oh, yeah. We're, 50 meters at 9.8 grams is one of the best intercepts that junior miners drilled this year. So we're very, the grade is impressive. It's wide open. especially to depth. So we're very, very happy to keep drilling.
Excellent. And we've discussed too before the way that Guyana, it has this almost mystique to it as this place that's a bit off the beaten path. You think, where the heck is Guyana? But it really is one of those countries that has natural resources that are going to come to market. So you're leading the charge in that regard.
Yeah, there are a number of companies there, but we're one of the first. It's the same geology as West Africa, which in the same rocks on West Africa, there's been 270 million ounces of gold discovered. In the Guyana Shield, it's 110 million ounces, and the Guyana Shield is actually a larger area. So that, intuitively, there's a lot more to be found there, and I think that's the case.
Right. And do you want to talk about it's the pricing right now in junior miners? We've all been taking a hit, and I have personally, and it just seems like everything is a bargain. I mean, do you want to give your own view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. When I look at our market capitalization, which is right now about 18 million, compared to peer companies with the team we have, with the projects we have, with the kind of results we're putting out, we're a new company. We only started in February, it's my job to get the word out. And I think as we get more eyeballs on the story, that will change. But you're right, in the current market, it can be a bit, a bit of a challenge some days.
It does feel a bit demoralizing when you put your money in this sometimes, but I remain optimistic. But you didn't get to the over the counter process. Enlighten me on how this works.
Well, you need to, we're listed on the CSE in Canada, so you need that first, and then you apply for an OTC listing, which makes a stock tradable in the US. And we have that application in from day one. It just takes a bit of time to go through. So I think within the next month to 6 weeks, we should have that, and that will help a lot with liquidity and
definitely. Yeah, and so do you want to give a few other aspects to the timeline? So basically, any day now you'll have the OTC. What else? What are the major events coming up for your firm?
Okay, so the major events for us are, we have Mazoa Hill, which is the intercept I talked about. That's one prospect of 8 on the Marudi property. We're exploring those other 8 and bringing more prospects to drill stage. So what we should see over the next few weeks is trenching results and surface results from those 8 prospects. I would hope additional prospects being identified. And as I said, right now we have the drill turning right back on Mazoa Hill. So we'll be putting out drill results from those step out holes on that 50 meters at 9.8 grams, which was from the first drill program. So that's the kind of sequence of events in the space of the next month.
Right. So there's a lot of action going on right now for Golden Shield Resources. A lot of new information arriving. So you could see the price fluctuate with that. If you want to go to the website, it is goldenshield.ca, and on the CSE or Canadian Securities Exchange, it is GSRI. They're also listed on the Frankfurt Exchange at 4LE0. Okay, Leo, great to chat with you. I look forward to next time.
Yeah, great to chat with you.
One of my concerns with moving to a place like the Bahamas is that you maybe miss out on, let's say, the networking opportunities, right? So if you're living in a place like Toronto, New York, whatever, you have all these smart people around you who are working in your field. You lean on them. There's there's a benefit there, right? There's this water cooler talk, whatever you want to call it. How have you overcome that challenge?
Well, I did the whole trade show thing for 10 years, from 2001 to 2011. Yeah. So I got a lot of networking done then. And then again, I did live in Toronto 2005, 06. And before COVID and it was more difficult to travel, I went back for almost the summers. I'd go back almost the whole summer, because hurricane season, it does get quite hot here. So I'd go back to usually August, September. In September, everyone comes back to work. So I would still do my networking and seeing my people and, that kind of thing. So that really hasn't hindered me that much. And I got to know so many people. Like, I'm not into naming names, but I know people like Stan Marty and a guy named Colin Cattell who's got Newfound Gold, like guys who have really, really built like, $1 billion type companies and sold them. And so I have a lot of good networking and a lot of access to deals. And, what I do too is, I still use brokers in Canada as a way to invest in deals. Now, I hope people don't think I'm a hypocrite, but the one thing I will say is, there is still good venture capital in Canada in mining deals. And so, I can get pitched, et cetera. But also, here's the flip side of not having that, that kind of view. I think it also helps your investing because you're not influenced. Because when you are around people in, say, junior mining all the time, or tech, or if you were in Silicon Valley or wherever, they tend to be bullish on their sector all the time.
Yeah.
Where I think when you're away from it, you kind of see things, like I know last year, and I've been off and on bearish in the markets, sometimes right, sometimes wrong in 2015 and 2018. But I got super duper bearish the middle of last year because I really felt the inflation coming, higher rates were coming, the market was in an epic bubble. And everyone I would talk to on the phone, we'd be like, oh, the market's gone up for so long. No one really thought it could go down. And I've done very well kind of shorting the last 9 months. And I think that would have been more difficult to do. And Templeton said that when he moved to the Bahamas. Actually, Templeton made most of his money after he moved to the Bahamas. And he said one thing that helped him was because he lived in New York before. He didn't go to all those meetings in New York and conferences and where people were all seeing the same presentations on the same companies and hearing the same views. He was able to take this more contrarian type approach,
And so, I want to get to your book too. So the next wave, how to make mega profits with the next debt collapse. So this book is slightly hyperbolic. I must say the title. But so what is this next wave, right? So I feel like whatever wave, I lose track now. I feel like we're in a whole uncharted territory in terms of debt and just in the Western world, at least what I've grown up with, even inflation. When I was a child, I never imagined having high inflation for a sustained period where central banks are just out of their mandates and they just don't seem to be too worried about it. So what is this next wave you're talking about?
Well, when I believe it or not, I actually started writing the book in late 2019, early 2020, right? And it was mostly just about inflation and debt, right? And then COVID hit. So then I was like, well, I told the publisher, we kind of have to, change a lot of this up now because this whole thing with COVID and the huge monetary and fiscal expansion they're doing to, kind of bail the economy out, that's made the inflationary wave even more aggressive. And then the issue with the book was my other parts of my business are doing really well. So it's kind of taken me a while to get it together. But then when I was just finishing it off, this whole thing in Russian happened. Just so you know, it'll probably be put out more in the late summer or fall, So then
there'll be a print version in a few months.
Yeah, no, even the e-version because I'm rewriting some of the chapters because I kind of saw this happening during COVID, but now I really think it's going to happening now. And this is where you're talking about inflation. We never thought was going to happen. Why did one reason that we never thought was going to happen? Even after the financial crisis, when they printed trillions of dollars, we had all these cheap products coming from China and, Vietnam and Asia. We had this whole globalization thing where that could keep prices somewhat subdued, right?
The Walmart effect, basically the presence of these imported goods, it kept prices in check.
But now the issue is with the supply chain bottlenecks, right? And even before all in China, because it is becoming more affluent, who knows now, right? But there was upward pressures on wages there, and just all the money that they printed, and now this supply shock of commodities from the Russian invasion. Now we're seeing this huge explosion in prices. And I also think it's kind of the deceleration or end of globalization, where countries are going to realize, in the States, they're giving huge tax incentives now for chip companies to come back. And remember, the line Yeah. The line from Apple and a lot of these other companies were, oh, we can't make that cheap enough here in the States, which I think in retrospect was total bullshit, just so they could keep their their margins as high as possible, producing everything in China and Asia, et cetera, right? So, but I think now it's almost like you have to become self-reliant and independent. Like now all these Middle Eastern African countries are going to have problems because they can't get grain and wheat from Ukraine and Russia, right? So it's like, like they're going to have to find ways to become more self-reliant or depend on other maybe be more diverse in where they import from. Obviously we've seen this also with the oil shock, especially the Western European countries that are dependent on Russia for energy. So I think that means a lot of production of commodities, if you can do it, or just goods and services in general, have to come back home or closer to home. Like remember the whole thing with NAFTA, what people forget about is Mexico was supposed to become the industrial, giant that China happened when NAFTA happened. So maybe more production goes to Mexico because your cost of production is still a little cheaper, et cetera. But I think it's either the import exports are going to be more localized, and you're also going to see like groups moving together, like the BRIC countries are looking at doing their own sort of SWIFT system. So I think you're going to see everything become more localized, centralized and more dependent. But the problem with that is that also can increase costs. If you're going to make chips or air conditioners or whatever they want going to make in the United States, right? Instead of, in Taiwan or Vietnam, et cetera, then you are going to, the cost of production, wages, et cetera, is much higher. So that's going to have to readjust upwards.
So the next wave you're talking about is basically a reverse of globalization and a let's say, a buttressing or an accentuation of the inflation we've already experienced for the past half year. And what is the flip side of this mega profits?
Well, that would be like, I think obviously, because I think right now we're in a consolidation in the commodities, but I think obviously longer term, I think there's going to be more supply shocks, more pressures on the increased prices of commodities. Remember, here's another factor that mixes in with this deglobalization. In the West, we're hitting this period where all these baby boomers are retiring, right? One reason that Canada has a lot of mass immigration is they're trying to create a job force big enough to pay into the CPP system, to pay out baby boomers.
They've got unfunded liabilities, just like the United States. Yeah.
Yeah. So the issue with that is that's also inflationary because I don't think we'll ever default on the debt or default on Social Security, but we'll get to the point where, the peg, those payments will not go out fast enough compared, to how they're increased. Like they'll say inflation's 6 and it's really 12, but they'll only give you a 5 or 6% cost of living increase. And that's how they'll be able to pay that off. And remember, if rates go high enough, that eats into the government budget. And then at some point, they're going to have to start some form of QE to suppress interest rates, right? They're doing that in Japan right now. Japan says they're going to buy an unlimited amount of 10-year bonds at 0.25% because Japan is so indebted. If the 10-year bond went to 1%, Japan is essentially broke, Right. So you're going to see a lot more of that. So I think that's all inflationary with the baby boomers, deglobalization, even the move to green energy, because, everyone acts like, like making an electric car is some kind of, magic wand, for a car company, but car companies have low margins. They don't make a lot of money. As we know, electric cars need lithium, cobalt, copper, et cetera, tons of, metals. And so the margins are going to be just as low. Like, here's the thing, Nissan and Toyota, Ford, they can make $20,000 lower end new cars. Like virtually no electric company, other than little city driving cars, is making a $20,000 car. Like Tesla's cheapest car is $50,000, $60,000. And that's with like no frills, right? So that all is going to push up prices as well. I do think one thing that could occur, and I don't try to get into politics too much with that, I think there's going to be a backlash against that because people are always going to vote with their wallets in the end. And I think that when it's obvious that this electric vehicle thing is just too expensive, there'll be a reversion back to either hybrids or maybe like very clean running gasoline cars, the stuff that can get 40, 50 miles to a gallon. And because it will just make more economic sense. Because no one's going to, like, again, if you take buying like a Prius to buying whatever, the EV that costs $50,000, that a couple $1,000 or $1,000, $2,000 you'll spend in gas, it will take you 20 years to make up for in the difference in the increased cost of the car, right? So it's really, not a winning game in the end. So I think there will be, a kind of a kickback towards that. But here's another issue too, as well. What's one of the issues we're talking about, here with supply chains and higher inflation going forward, et cetera. One of the issues, everyone's like, oh, we're dependent on Putin for 8% of the world's oil. Look where this has got us. Guess who has 50%, or I think it's closer to 70 or 80% of the world's lithium supply, right? Is China. So if you think depending on Russia, 8% of the world's oil is bad and whatever, a quarter of the world's fertilizer is bad, do you really want to depend on China for 70 to 80% of lithium that you need for electric vehicles? And if push comes to shove and there was some geopolitical problem with China, they could just cut us off the way Russia could cut off energy to Western Europe, right? And that even gives us an even bigger bind because on top of just the lithium being shut off for electric vehicles and, batteries for cell phones, solar power, etc. Well, then all these companies have huge amounts of production in China. Like doing sanctions on Russia because they just, basically export commodities is a lot easier than doing sanctions on China when you have all these U.S. multinationals like Apple, NVIDIA, virtually any tech company, Nike, etc., or even a company like Starbucks, which has a large percentage of sales in China. They're so dependent on it. It would it would really crush a lot of these companies.
Well, before we let you go, I really want you to give a little bit of the juice with this making mega profits element. So I know you mentioned commodities. Yeah, give us a taster so people buy.
What I do personally is we're talking about connections. I'm very, very active in the junior mining sector, right? So that's kind of right now I'm hedging with put options because I think we're going to be in this bust phase in the stock market for the next, 6 to 12 months, right? Maybe 8 months. So I'm doing that and I do kind of black swan trades. Okay, let's take that angle first. So I know a lot of people love this company, but they're in real trouble now with what's going on in China. NVIDIA, and this is purely from a technical standpoint, has the most parabolic chart I've ever seen. And I've put options on NVIDIA and, there's a saying that all parabolic curves collapse. So they all go like this and then they all go like that, right? And that happened to .coms, Japanese real estate in the States back in 2007, 2008, gold back in 1980, etc. So I'm hedging with these put options on companies and also doing, with this very small percentage of my portfolio, like way out of the money puts, which would, hit 50, 100 to 1 if there's a big tank in the stock. And then, because I'm very active in junior mining, I'm doing gold, precious metals, base metal companies and anything that's going to benefit from higher inflation. And then, I buy the private placements and then you have warrants attached to it. So then you can do that. Like, for example, I'll give you a few examples. Like one of my best performing deals the last couple of years, Aftermath went from 8 cents. We did a placement. It went to as high as $1.50. Wallbridge went from 8 cents to north of 50 cents. I think went nearly to $1. Of course, these are like best case type ones, but I even did like tech deals, that went from 20, 30 cents to, about $1, et cetera. So those are kind of the mega profits to me because the junior market is still so depressed right now. None of these companies are being represented, with their ounces in the ground. And that is where kind of the leverage is in the mining sector. Like actually one of the best performing deals we got into pre-IPO, or some of my people got into pre-IPO, was Newfound Gold, which we did $1 at $1. And I think it went to 12. It's about $7-8 now. But, and obviously when these things go up 5, 6, 7 times, I do recommend people take a bunch of money off the table and then kind of rotate into the next one. But I really think that's where you're going to make your money. Like, for example, it still trades, but they sold off the major property. And we're actually, I had a deal called Paramount Gold and Silver, which I bought at a very low pre-IPO price. Like we're talking 5-10 cents, and then went into multiple dollars. So that's the kind of thing I do. And I think and these things are very cyclical, but I think we're just starting the next up cycle in juniors. And other than like, a year-long period, say like 2016, 2018, 2019, and then there was like about a 6 to 12 months period in like 2020. Like really these stocks have not been in a multiple year, bull market since 2011. So I think we're starting that. And I remember the best phase of the market that I was in junior stocks was from 2002 to 2008. Like even better than anything, with gold at 2000. So I think that is going to happen again.
Right. Okay. Folks, addictedtoprofits.net is the website. And apparently David will be getting back his premium or paid service soon. Right now he has free email updates to discuss what he's doing in his interviews. So you can get that right away. Do you want to have a comment on why you're bringing back the paid service or what that will include?
Yeah, I want to do that number one because, like I said, with me doing put options and shorting, I'm actively trading more. Yeah. And really that's tough. I want people that are kind of willing to pay for that rather than novices, because you have to know what you're doing a bit. And having a bit of a paid service is a way to kind of, get those more sophisticated people in. And then also, I can't do every company I'm going to trade in a private placement. So the pay service allows me to recommend more companies. Right now, I just kind of consult with companies and do the private placements in those deals. So this allows me to buy more. And actually, if I'm going to spin the service here for you, there's a great company I have, but it's only going to be for pay members when I do it. They're actually involved in fertilizer and ammonia. And that's huge, right? I think that's actually a bigger deal than maybe gold and silver and metals right now with everything going on in Russia, Ukraine. And they're really going to start ramping up the production in that probably at the end of the summer into the fall. So that will kind of be like the first recommendation I do on the pay service, probably in roughly like 10 days time or so. So, and look and also it's always nice to have multiple ways to create cash flow. So the pay service is not something that will get me rich, but it'll give me a nice little stream of income as well. Sure. So, yeah.
I gotcha. Yeah. So David Skarica, addictedtoprofits.net. Thank you for your time. I hope we can get you back on.
Can I finish with one more thing?
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Because we were talking about go back to the lifestyle because my ADD is kicking in. But we were talking off air. If anyone's interested, there's a company called Barstool Sports. They're owned by Penn, the gambling company. But they had a guy come and visit me in the island in the Bahamas. We did 5 or 6 videos right before the lockdown started about 2 years ago. The videos, I talk a bit about the markets in them, but they're mostly just funny and they show you kind of like the lifestyle you have on the island. We visit a bunch of the weird characters here. So if anyone wants to watch those, they're very, very funny. And they're pretty big. Like they've got 150, 200,000 views each on YouTube.
We'll track those down and get them in the show notes, goldnewsletter.com/podcast if you want to get all the additions to this episode.